It's really a pleasure to be here today. For us, it's a pretty important moment. As today, actually now, we're launching the International Advisory Body for Submarine Cable Resilience. That is an important milestone in protecting our global digital infrastructure, ensuring its resilience, and ensuring that it serves well our global economy around the world. So this advisory body will work to review and highlight the challenges for the global networks that are occurring. We'll advocate approaches and develop and advocate approaches that strengthen the global telecommunications network and facilitate international cooperation on technical development and policy frameworks and investment models as well. We're very pleased that this body will be co-chaired by His Excellency Bosun Tijani, Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy of Nigeria, together with Professor Sandra Maximiano from Portuguese National Communications Regulatory Authority, ANACOM. And this body will include, and the people and specific membership is being announced as we speak as well through the issue of the press release and with a full list on dedicated website. It will be composed of 40 leaders representing diverse regions, sectors and economies, including government ministers and heads of regulators, industry executives, as well as technical experts and heads of regional organizations dealing with these topics. Actually, it has around half, around half government representatives and half industry representatives, with a few other parties also to represent diverse stakeholder groups. So this advisory body will identify key issues to ensure that submarine cables are built, deployed and maintained with a greater resiliency. And they will also propose best practices, promote best practices, and foster international collaboration in this regard. So today, indeed, why it's important? Because submarine cables carry around 99% of the global internet traffic. So that means that anything we do today in the digital world are dependent on submarine cables, from our emails and text messages to financial transactions, critical government communications, cloud services, social media, our video streaming services, and so on. And so in that regard, it's definitely not just a technical issue, but the issue that can affect our economies and our societies. And however, we see that this critical infrastructure is vulnerable to disruptions from accidental human activity, from natural hazards, from aging infrastructure. We usually identified around 150 to 200 faults that occur globally each year, equivalent to about 3 faults per week, and many of them indeed have an important impact, from short-term disruptions that affect economies, government operations and businesses, to submarine cable longer-term effects that can affect economic transactions as well as social transactions, but also sometimes they actually affect the whole societies and economies, especially in more remote islands and places. For example, in 2022, tsunamis triggered volcanic eruption. Tsunamis triggered by volcanic eruption in the Pacific Ocean disconnected Tonga in the Pacific for quite a few weeks, and then after that it took nearly 18 months to fully repair. So that's indeed can have a very stark importance for the countries. In this, for example, specific instances, it really limits abilities to provide essential emergency response, essential support for disaster management and recovery as well. So this we're very happy to be joined in this effort by International Cable Protection Committee, which is a long-standing industry body bringing together around 230 different members from 70 countries that has a long-standing work in international submarine cable resiliency. So it's our joint effort. I'm actually myself, together with the representative of ICPC, International Cable Protection Committee, will be serving as executive co-secretaries to this body. We also Very happy that we have, as I mentioned before, all the regions in the world represented, all the different countries, different stakeholders, which we believe will give an opportunity and a platform for inclusive discussion and inclusive work to ensure resilience again of this very important systems in this regard. Now, what's next? So in December, we're planning to have a first virtual meeting of our advisory body, which will start the work and start setting out the work agenda. And we're planning the inaugural Submarine Cable Resilience Summit to be held in Nigeria at the end of February of 2025. This will be the opportunity for the advisory body to meet in person for the first time, but also we'll be inviting other stakeholders as well to join us in these important discussions. So we are confident that this creation of this body and the work of this body will contribute to strengthening important part of digital resilience, submarine cable resilience, and as we discussed, which has a very important impacts across the world for our economies and societies. So with that, thank you very much, Alessandra. I'm very open to questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I understand that David and his team have sent you the press release, so you have all the information. Let me start with Chris Vogt, the Chief of Office of the Bureau here of the French AFP. Well, international, as you like to say.
Agence Française. Hi. Thanks for taking my questions. First of all, could you give us a little bit more sense of concretely how this new committee is going to work, and maybe give us some examples of what can be done to make those cables more resilient? And there is one topic that you seem to have avoided, but I'm sure it's by accident, is that recently we had an event where cables were sabotaged. So I would like to have your comment on that, and maybe is there anything you can do to avoid this kind of things?
So thank you very much. So of course, the body itself will determine its deliverables and working methods, and that's what we'll start to do from December, and then especially in our Abuja summit in February. But we already envisage some of the key early deliverables that could be considered from set of best practices and principles that we can promote together across the world to make sure that all the countries know what are the best practices in ensuring that submarine cables are protected, but also when disruptions happen, that the recovery is facilitated in a speedily manner. Regretfully, still very often it takes a rather long time for required permits to be issued, for required technical services to be summoned, for those submarine cables to be restored. And we believe this is something that we need to together to promote with the countries and understand what are the best practices in this regard. The second aspect is, of course, linking together with the broader UN issues, making sure that submarine cable resilience issues are well represented in other discussions, whether it's a law of the sea related discussions, whether it's a seabed related discussions, whether it's a maritime transport related discussions. So this body will also intend to invite other related relevant UN agencies to support this work and to serve as an interface with these broader discussions. We need to make sure that as different economic activity takes place in the sea, that economic activity takes into account the need to protect the submarine cables as well. And another deliverable that we are considering, and it sounds like very simple but very impactful, is a network of focal points of the members to be able to reach when the incidents happen. There's still, in a number of countries, it's not very clear who is the single point of entry, who is the focal point if the disruptions happen, but also when the recovery efforts need to take place. We also need to remember that submarine cables that pass through the territorial waters or continental shelf itself of specific countries may not even land in that specific country. So sometimes, the question is that some countries need to issue the permits for the cables that they're not, or the cable repairs that not even land in that country. And I think what's very important in the work of this body to highlight the importance of global solidarity in protecting what is essential submarine cable infrastructure. The body itself is not set up to investigate specific incidents or attribute the causes of the incidents, of the specific incidents, or name, let's say, those who may have been involved in those incidents. The body itself, by definition, its idea is to work on a commonly agreed best practices and a commonly agreed responses to the issues that could generally around the world would help to strengthen that resilience. Investigation of specific incidents, attribution, and taking specific actions remain the responsibility of specific national authorities.
Was that a hand up again, Chris? No? Okay. So other questions in the room? Jamie Keaton, Associated Press.
Hello, Mr. Lamanauskas. Thank you for coming to see us. Just going back to what Christoph had referred to, I mean, we had an incident that very recently, 2 incidents, in fact, I think, that one of which involved your own country, a cable from, I believe it was Sweden to Lithuania. Can you tell us, do you have any insight into what actually happened on that? Can you tell us whether or not sabotage is involved? And could you also tell us, you mentioned, I think in your preliminary remarks that there are 3 faults, I think you said, per day, I think was the term used. What are the consequences of those? I mean, do those tend to be long-term problems, or are they easily resolvable? I mean, can telecommunications via these undersea cables? I think people don't really quite understand. At least, speaking for myself, I don't understand whether or not if there's a severing of the cables undersea, how long that could take to repair, and what the actual consequences are. In terms of communication, can people be without communication for a long period of time, or is it easily resolvable?
Oh, thank you very much. Just, I mentioned three a week, or more or less on average. And indeed, there is also, so this has happened around the world. Indeed, we saw also earlier this year important disruptions in West Africa, in East Africa, in Red Sea, which is and through this close to Suez Canal, which is a very important part of, let's say, global routing of the submarine cables. So regretfully, we see these incidents around the world. Of course, I'm not speaking here in my national capacity. I'm speaking here as the representative of International Telecommunication Union. So in this regard, we do receive reports of the incidents of the countries. However, as I mentioned before, it's not our role to investigate, to attribute, or to determine the issues. What we do help with the member states, referring them to the practices that they can use to do that, to apply in this regard, and also the right industry bodies that they can support their work. So, and we will continue to do so. However, TU in this context doesn't have this right to do the attributions, and the countries hasn't given us the mandate to do so. In terms of the disruptions, they of course vary in length and in severity, and a lot of them, of course, are mitigated by the redundancy for the submarine cables. Of course, the very popular routes have a number of cables that the traffic can be rerouted, and that's why in many times the, let's say, general public doesn't necessarily notice the disruptions when they happen. That's the industry colleagues, they notice those. However, in some instances, for example, when a number of cables are cut off, and We regretfully have these incidents even in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, where sometimes a number of cables are cut off because of the anchoring activities. Those disruptions on these very, let's say, important channels can be really felt and noticed. And of course, they're especially important in the places where that redundancy is reduced. And I mentioned the example of Tonga, which had in the recent 2 years 2 cuts of the prolonged length. And because that was the only cable that Tonga was connected with, that disruption was really felt. And the problem is with the serious disruptions, the recovery can take weeks, months, and even years. So with a full recovery of Tonga took 18 months. In some cases can take a few months as well. As determiner of this is a number of factors. Is of course the ability to route the traffic, as I mentioned, the ability to the nature of the disruption, but also the policy and regulatory issues that we'll be looking into. For example, length of issuing permits for recovery and for works in the specific areas. That sometimes could be a very important determinant how long the repairs can take place. The ability to procure these technical services, including cable ships services, and get them available for the recovery. And these issues is exactly the issues that we're looking into, how to make sure that the policy and regulatory environment is facilitated, that permits are issued clearly and expediently. There's very clear which organizations in the countries are responsible for this, and that we have some practices and understanding what is the best way to also ensure that the technical services is available when the countries really suffer from that. While it's not our primary task, it's still important for us to look in the redundancy aspects, especially in the countries, as I mentioned, that regretfully have like a single line of connectivity through the submarine cable. And therefore, in these specific cases, whether there's also aspects that from the global solidarity point of view, we need to assess whether we as a global community need to work to strengthen this type of resiliency as well.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I know you have to be out of here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We have 3 questions on the platform. Is that okay? Yeah. So I'll give the floor now to Yuri Aprelev, RIA Novosti.
Yes, thank you, Alessandro. Good morning. Good morning, David. Good morning, Thomas. I have, in fact, 2 questions. The first one is about the fact that you are talking about the main causes of damage, including accidental activity, human activity, such as fishing, onshoring, as well as natural hazard and equipment failure. Do you have any idea of how many cables a year are deliberately damaged, or you have absolutely none data on that? And my second question is that in any way can we say that the cases of deliberatory damage of cables are exceptional, or is this something that you are seeing rising year on year? Thank you.
So we don't have a data on specific deliberate damages, also because we don't do the attribution of the causes of the disruptions. What our partners, International Cable Protection Committee, say that around 80% of the cable disruptions are caused by accidental human activity or natural hazards. So we're stopping here. What we don't know whether the causes of other let's say disruptions. But again, here our idea is to first of all to increase the overall resiliency of the cables and leave other topics for the national authorities to determine.
He was asking if there's an increase in...
Again, so because we don't have a specific, let's say, we know that on average the disruptions on the cables is, I would say, 150 to 200. We've seen rather high-profile disruptions already this year, like and last year, such as Tonga disruptions, such as Red Sea and Red Sea disruptions, such as West Africa disruptions, such as East African disruptions. Actually, that was also triggered some of the member states, including Nigeria, that will be leading our that'll be co-leading our advisory body to come to us, because the disruptions, for example, on the West Africa coast caused a very severe economic impact on Nigeria, and that's why they reached out to us. But it's not, again, we don't have a statistics of the differentiation between, let's say, intentional damage or the unintentional one.
Nick Cumming Bruce, New York Times.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on previous questions, you've mentioned average numbers per annum. Could you give us a specific number of disruptions for this year or for last year? And secondly, given the strategic significance of the cables, as you have highlighted, is there any intention to move towards a more formal sort of international instrument, be it a treaty or a convention, to regulate or to increase international protections for submarine cables? Thank you.
So thank you very much. So there is no official or compulsory reporting on the submarine cable disruptions today. So what we rely on is what our industry partners report to us. And this is not necessarily all the disruptions that are happening. So as I have to say that 150 to 200 was the number that was given to us. So I'll have to stick to that number. Of course, the body itself, the advisory body, will have to, may consider to see if there's some sort of reporting mechanism is necessary or not. On the international instruments, today we have a convention on the law of the sea that also governs the submarine cable related activity in the oceans. Part of the discussion, though, is what are the practices to make sure that this provisions for protection are the best implemented. We have related UN General Assembly resolutions of oceans and the law of the sea as well, adopted in 2023, that among other topics mention responsibility of the states to protect the submarine cables. So we have a, let's say, I would say, emphasis on importance to protect submarine cables both at the treaty level as well as UN General Assembly level. However, what this body is now will be looking into how to implement those in practice to make sure that the best practices are there, that the countries know how to implement their responsibilities, that the global community works together to effectuate these provisions.
Thank you very much. Maya Plants, the UN brief.
So my question is is regarding the number of cables around submarine cables around the world, if you have this number off the top of your head, and redundancy systems in place, and which you mentioned that there is no, of course ITU doesn't have responsibility to investigate this, but which organizations or law bodies are responsible to investigate? Were you suggesting there isn't one way of actually bringing it to justice if this was done not by accident or even if it was by negligence? And which countries and bodies own this infrastructure?
So the statistics we have is around 500 cables around the world that today cross the oceans. Of course, that number is continuously changing. We see great that we see actual activity and further investments in submarine cables every day, actually. So in some specific routes, including around Africa, including in the Pacific, and including in other different important routes. So we hope that that number will grow. Of course, that number is also offset by the aging of the existing cable infrastructure. Submarine cables have a lifetime. Traditional standard lifetime is around 25 years, plus extended lifetime from, first extended lifetime, but it doesn't span, so long. So we also need that infrastructure needs to be continuously replaced to make sure that that the aging infrastructure doesn't cause the problems. So that those investments need to continue, and we of course encourage that. In terms of investigation, as I mentioned before, this is the responsibility of national authorities, national jurisdictions, and national law. It's governed by the existing international agreements and national law determining jurisdiction over the territorial sea and the continental shelf activities. And of course, national authorities are competent to determine their jurisdiction and the appropriate course of action. Thank you.
Thomas, I know I said 3, but there is a last question. Can we take it? Okay, John Zarokostas, France 24 English channel.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the briefing. I was wondering, in your definition and the number of disruptions, does that include hacking of submarine cables by multiple intelligence services?
So the current scope of Digital Advisory Body and our collaboration includes the physical damage to the cables. So we're not looking in this context of other cybersecurity challenges. This scope includes physical disruptions.